From the moment Lu Sheng arrived at the Fifth Divine Martial University until his departure, it only took him less than 30 minutes. Just as before, he came here for one sole purpose only, and that is to shatter the record of the Divine Martial Tower. And so he did, advancing to the 28th floor with ease. Just like that, Lu Sheng's arrival stirred up a commotion once again, and the students of the Fifth Divine Martial University watched in disbelief. Even the strongest seniors, who had been in the meeting room earlier, lost their courage to defend the tower upon seeing Lu Sheng. They could only watch helplessly as Lu Sheng effortlessly broke their records and then left composedly, while others shed tears of frustration. As Lu Sheng slowly walked out of the gate of the university, he reflected on his own growth in the last couple of days. In just 2 days, he had broken the records of 2 towers and battled 2 martial saints when they were still at the 8th level great grandmasters. From these battles, he had gained substantial rewards, not necessarily money-wise, but in terms of marital growth. Not only did he refine his grandmaster will twice, it also significantly increased his psychic power, although he had not yet been tested, but he was confident that he was possibly breaking through to the 6th level. Despite all these changes, what made him most excited was that he also successfully advanced his perfect martial path to its 2nd form. Raising his right hand, Lu Sheng calmly observed his palm. This was an all-around improvement power concentration, pinpoint explosion, weakness insight, meticulous control, and even the addition of attack prediction. Wait a second. I thought he was already too overpowered, and now attack prediction? Is this some sort of ultra instinct or observation hockey? Anyway, the sensation of being the jack of all trades and perfect in everything made him become more pronounced. With that being said, in the 2nd form of the perfect martial path, he felt as though his entire body was filled with unparalleled power, as if nothing and no one could stop him. For a brief moment, something sparked in him. He suddenly felt that, whether it was the 11th level or the 12th level, even might not be his limit. If he continued on this path, could he one day enter an even more special realm? Oh, Lu Sheng, don't get ahead of yourself. You aren't even Grandmaster yet. Lu Sheng took a deep breath, repressing the expanding ambition and wild fantasies in his heart. As Lu Sheng stepped out of the gate, every gaze was drawn to him. However, he didn't care. His mission here was accomplished, and it was time to return. Meanwhile, Lin Zi, who had been waiting outside, waved at Lu Sheng the moment he saw him. Lin Zi's eyes were bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept all night, yet his spirit was incredibly high. His face was filled with anticipation and excitement. He congratulated Lu Sheng on breaking another tower's record, and inquired if he was planning to visit the next Divine Martial University. Lu Sheng checked the time, and then nodded. It was still early, and they could make a trip to the 6th Divine Martial University next. Hearing this, Lin Zi's excitement intensified. He happily declared that he had already prepared everything. Lu Sheng was momentarily puzzled, not understanding what Lin Zi meant. Following Lin Zi's pointing direction, he realized what already arranged meant. The gate of the 5th Divine Martial University was already lined with hundreds of neatly arranged taxis. It turned out that Lin Zi was not the only one who came. There were hundreds of students from 7th Divine Martial University came to cheer for Lu Sheng. Everyone stood excitedly outside the cars, their eyes fixed on Lu Sheng. Before Lu Sheng even had the opportunity to say anything, Lin Zi had already quickly ushered Lu Sheng into the front taxi, followed by a large group of freshmen and seniors from the 7th University, who orderly got into the taxis. Seeing this army of taxis, many drivers were taken aback and couldn't help asking the students inside if there was a major event happening. The students in the back seats, with sparkling eyes and brimming with excitement, said they were going to witness the birth of a dynasty. The taxi drivers were speechless by the response, but decided to not ask any further questions. What followed was, the fleet of over 100 taxis roared through the capital and eventually stopped at the gate of the 6th Divine Martial University. Clearly, the students there had already heard the news, but the sight of Lu Sheng arriving still caused exclamations among them. The scene was overwhelmingly impressive, almost as if a demon king had descended, followed by his horde of minions. Lu Sheng then opened the car door and stepped out slowly. The students from the 7th Divine Martial University followed pursuit, quietly waiting for Lu Sheng to lead the way. Under his lead, they all entered the campus of the 6th Divine Martial University. The aura they exuded made the nearby students instinctively step back. Suddenly, From the crowd emerged a senior student towering over 2 meters tall, no other than Shen Kong, the top senior of the 6th Divine Martial University. Seeing their strongest senior stand up and sizing Lu Sheng, the students here soon felt reassured. Despite hearing about Lu Sheng's achievements, they were not afraid with their pillar of strength present to defend their honor. Shen Kong, with his arms crossed, looked towards Lu Sheng and asked if he had come to challenge the tower. His voice was deep, but became somewhat hoarse upon meeting Lu Sheng's gaze. In response to the inquiry, Lu Sheng wasn't intimidated. He casually nodded and then asked Shen Kong what his purpose was. Hearing this, Shen Kong narrowed his eyes and clenched his teeth, as if transforming into a lion ready to battle Lu Sheng. However, the next second, he bowed his head and said with a grin, welcoming Lu Sheng to challenge the tower, offering to lead the way since their school was quite large and he didn't want to delay Lu Sheng's time. Seeing this, everyone was taken aback by this turn of events. Nonetheless, half an hour later, Lu Sheng left the 6th Divine Martial University. Although the Divine Martial Tower there had one extra floor, the strongest was still at the Great Grandmaster realm. Regardless, Lu Sheng once again broke the record with ease, leaving under Shenlong's mixed expressions of laughter and tears. Shenlong sighed, wondering what else he could do. Guard the tower himself? He resignedly thought that being embarrassed wasn't unique to their university alone, so it didn't quite matter. He shrugged while waving Lu Sheng goodbye. Each Divine Martial University had a different number of floors in their Divine Martial Towers, but the result was the same. Lu Sheng took the next few days, heading over to all of the Divine Universities, and broke all the tower records from the 6th all the way to the 2nd Divine Martial University. Finally, they arrived at the 1st Divine Martial University, which was Lu Sheng's last destination. This place had a long history. Here, alongside the 2nd Divine Martial University, was founded by 2 of the earliest martial saints of their nation. Lu Sheng walked into the gate of the 1st Divine Martial University with his usual composure. The students of the 1st university crowded around the entrance of the Divine Martial Tower, blocking it completely. As Lu Sheng approached, they were as if facing a formidable enemy. A young man, wearing a hoodie and wielding a long sword, leaped down from a high place, thinking himself quite stylish. Amidst the dust, he asked Lu Sheng if he knew where he was. Lu Sheng glanced at the towering Divine Martial Tower before him and smiled, saying he was here to challenge the tower, so of course he knew. The young man had a calm gaze as he slowly drew his long sword, then explained the history of the 1st Divine Martial University, founded by 2 of the earliest martial saints of their nation. In terms of history and heritage, this university was unparalleled compared to the others. The young man raised his sword, speaking in a voice that everyone could hear, implying that if Lu Sheng wanted to make a name for himself, he first had to see if his sword would allow it. Well, I think we all know how this is going. As he finished speaking, a powerful aura surged from him, bringing with it an icy, bone-chilling wind. Ice crystals and snowflakes began to form around him. He thrust his sword into the ground, instantly freezing the surface. This was his technique, the ice field, also a manifestation of his Grandmaster's will. Seeing this, Lu Sheng was surprised. The young man had already possessed his own Grandmaster's will, even if it was just a trace of it. At the same time, his technique was even capable of freezing his legs. This was unexpected and showed the exceptional caliber of the 1st Divine Martial University's students. More confident than ever, the young man smiled and slowly pulled his sword from the ground. To everyone's surprise, like Lu Sheng, he was also the nation's top martial scholar during his days. Suddenly, all eyes in the area converged on him. The students present could feel his Grandmaster's will. Even though it was just a trace, given another 10 years, people believed that he would surely become a 7th-level Grandmaster. Hearing the praises around him, the young man raised his long sword, pointing it at Lu Sheng, and asked if Lu Sheng understood the skill gap between them. Lu Sheng, feeling the falling snowflakes, recalled the female Grandmaster from his dream realm. The young man before him paled in comparison. To compare the two, one was a snowflake, while the other was an iceberg. Lu Sheng brushed off the snowflakes from his shoulder and smiled. Didn't want to waste too much time. He told the guy that it was indeed commendable for someone so young in this era to have possessed his own Grandmaster will. The young man was momentarily stunned. Then his veins bulged in anger. He seemed to dislike Lu Sheng's seemingly dismissive attitude, especially how Lu Sheng sounded as if he was talking to an inferior. feeling the need to teach Lu Sheng a lesson and show him the true gap between them. Watching the young man charge towards him, Lu Sheng shook his head with a hint of disappointment, commenting that compared to her, no other than the female grandmaster in his dream realm, his ice grandmaster will was too weak. Suddenly, a scorching aura surged from Lu Sheng. Speaking calmly, he simply said, "Too weak." Suddenly, the area around Lu Sheng seemed to be scorched by high temperatures, raising smoke and making it difficult for the surrounding students to keep their eyes open. The ice beneath his feet vanished instantly, and the entire ice field rapidly melting. The young man, repelled by the wave of heat as he charged, could only plant his long sword into the ground to barely withstand the force. He shielded his eyes with one hand against the dazzling, sun-like brightness. His fully unleashed ice field melted away in an instant. The next moment, Lu Sheng was already beside him, patting his shoulder and saying indifferently that if the young man had been his contemporary, he could have only been a runner-up. The young man's face was filled with shock, drenched in sweat, his eyes wide open, and his face a picture of disbelief. His sword slowly fell to the ground. He couldn't comprehend how Lu Sheng could be so strong. No one could give him an answer. Meanwhile, Lu Sheng leisurely walked into the divine martial tower. At that moment, on a nearby rooftop, several cloaked figures watched the scene intently. They observed Lu Sheng entering the tower. They all had serious expressions on their faces. One of the cloaked figures broke the silence and spoke. "This Lu Sheng of the 7th Divine Martial University." He paused and then continued, "If he becomes a Grand Master within 5 years, he will surely have the stature of a martial saint." On the other side, inside the Student Union building of the 1st Divine Martial University, a senior student was walking back and forth, his eyes closed in apparent anxiety, held up a cigarette and took several long drags as he anxiously awaited for the news. It wasn't long until someone entered the room. He immediately opened his eyes and asked, "Has Lu Sheng entered the Divine Martial Tower?" The female student who just walked into the room nodded in affirmation. Upon hearing this, the male student was momentarily stunned and then inquired if the two had confronted each other. Again, the girl nodded and added, "Not only did they confront each other, but Bai also fully displayed his martial willpower." However, nothing could stop Lu Sheng. In the room, silence hung heavy for a moment. The male student couldn't believe it. To go up against this guy named Lu Sheng, Bai had put forth his best efforts, and still couldn't even halt him in the slightest. The girl continued, delivering even more unbelievable news. It turned out that Lu Sheng didn't even throw a single punch from beginning to end. In fact, it almost seemed as if Lu Sheng didn't even take Bai seriously. The girl tells him that Lu Sheng has merely showcased his martial willpower. The girl tried to find the right words to describe what she saw, and after a few seconds she finally said, "It's as if Lu Sheng used his own martial willpower to dissolve Bai's martial willpower." Hearing this, the male student's body suddenly trembled, his mouth hanging wide open in disbelief. He didn't even notice he collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by the revelation. He couldn't fathom what it meant for martial willpower to be completely dissolved by one another. Now that their top senior student had been soundly defeated, he then wondered what he, as the second, and the girl as the third strongest senior could do now. Even though he was the second, in reality, he was only slightly inferior to Bai. However, if Bai was deemed unworthy of Lu Sheng's full strength, everyone else would merely be lambs to the slaughter. The girl was initially frustrated, but had gradually grown resigned to the situation. Her original plan had been to follow in the footsteps of Tan Zhongyu and become the strongest person under the Grandmaster to expedite her ascension to the 7th-level Grandmaster. However, the sudden emergence of this demon king Lu Sheng had cast a shadow over all of the 7 Divine Martial University. She sighed, realizing that she was only a few months away from graduation. Why did she have to encounter such an anomaly as Lu Sheng? The male student didn't respond, merely gazing out the window. By this time, news of Lu Sheng breaking all 7 Divine Martial Tower records had already spread throughout the capital. With only a few months of enrollment, as a freshman, he had risen to the top of the 7 Saints list, earning him the title of the strongest student in the history of all 7 Divine Martial University. Simultaneously, he was deemed as the strongest under Grandmaster. As countless people marveled at the name Lu Sheng, he was in his dormitory in a deep slumber. To be precise, Lu Sheng had entered his dream realm. Passing through the horde of zombies, He stepped into a serene room, summoning the artificial intelligence, i.e., as Lu Sheng gazed at the various information now before him. He whispered to himself, wondering if he could achieve greatness this time. He then instructed IE to retrieve his life's records, realizing that his reputation in the real world held little significance to him. He had virtually no entertainment or hobbies, apart from one thing, none other than martial arts. Day in and day out, his routine consisted of training, eating, and sleeping. Well, I think Lu Sheng, you forgot to mention your routine also consisted of kicking everyone's ass. As if Lu Sheng could hear us, Lu Sheng tilted his head while rubbing the back of his head, explaining kicking other people's ass was mostly unavoidable. Oof, is that so? Well, I guess you're right. In the next moment, Lu Sheng's face transformed into a mischievous grin, saying, "There's nothing quite like the satisfaction of crushing a detested yet formidable opponent with your own hands. It's simply exhilarating." Well, what can I say? That's our boy, Lu Sheng. Jokes aside, as we continue the story, Lu Sheng's thoughts also snap back into focus. He redirected his attention to the personal information displayed before him. Yi had already retrieved Lu Sheng's complete personal info, and when he saw the words of 9th-level martial artist under his name, excitement welled up within him. After all, he had ultimately achieved the status of a martial saint, even though he still had a long way to go to reach his goal of the 12th level. This was a huge step going in the right direction. Suppressing the waves of emotions within, Lu Sheng continued scrolling. As for his life experiences and historical evaluations, they all revolved around his astonishing prowess in martial arts. It was clear that future generations regarded him as a martial prodigy. He glanced briefly at his past experiences before arriving at the most recent ones. For instance, he had broken the record of all 7 trial towers, becoming the strongest of his generation. Lu Sheng was somewhat curious about why they referred to the Divine Martial Tower as a trial tower here, but he didn't dwell on it for too long. The next segment, however, left him briefly shocked. It was something that had yet to occur, an event happening in the future. Turned out, during the same year, Lu Sheng would secure first place in the National Collegiate Martial Arts Competition, and ended up killing a Grand Master competitor from the Jidao Martial School during the competition. The image depicted Lu Sheng holding a long spear, steadily advancing toward the competitor laying on the ground motionless. Lu Sheng was suddenly taken aback, doubting whether he was seeing things correctly. He believed it would be extremely difficult for him to commit murder on the spot, let alone in front of billions of viewers during the National Collegiate Martial Arts Competition. And it wasn't just any martial artist he was set to kill. It was a Grand Master from the Jidao Martial School, backed by one of the 3 existing martial saint. What could possibly motivate him to risk offending a martial saint and kill a grandmaster in front of a public audience? Lu Sheng furrowed his brow, utterly perplexed. Unable to find any answers, he reluctantly put aside this puzzling revelation for the time being and continued scrolling through his life's narrative. In spite of that, he later joined Tan Zhongyu as his 3rd disciple, which was somewhat expected and not too surprising. However, in the next scene, at the age of 32, he became a great grandmaster, with a long scar on his face but still radiating vitality and confidence. The specific moment of becoming a grandmaster was not detailed, possibly leaving it as suspense for us. Anyway, the following scene showed Lu Sheng during his later years, achieving the rank of martial saint at the age of 70, establishing his own Saint Martial Arts School, and earning the title of the Perfect Martial Saint by the World of Martial Arts. In the martial year 457, at the age of 161, Lu Sheng gazed upon his beloved city, and with his strength depleted, he forever closed his eyes. At this point, Lu Sheng's historical evaluation and access to the Fireseed Resource Library had both risen to 6 stars and level 6, respectively. As Lu Sheng continued reading, he became lost in thought. Clenching his fist, he pondered the achievements of the Perfect Martial Saint and the establishment of the Saint Martial Arts School. Compared to his previous check of personal information, when the highest he achieved was a great grandmaster, Lu Sheng's lifespan was significantly longer compared to that of a martial saint. His expression grew complex. It was clear that his perfect martial path was no easy endeavor. At this point, many of us might be eager to see what we've all been waiting for: Lu Sheng's relationship status. However, he hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should delve into this. A few images of beautiful women flashed through his mind. End of the day, Lu Sheng was still a young man. He had some curiosity. In the end, he resisted the temptation. After all, too much exposure to such things could cloud his martial path, and women would only slow down his sword-drawing speed. After taking some time to calm his emotions, Lu Sheng remembered what he should do now that his permissions had been upgraded. What he wanted to know most was the entirety of the Fireseed plan, but unfortunately, his current permissions were still insufficient. Lu Sheng had predicted this outcome. He thought for a moment and began to search for information about the origin of the exotic beasts. A massive amount of data and research papers appeared before Lu Sheng in an instant. The overwhelming volume of information made him feel like his head had been struck by a hammer. Countless documents, studies, and debates filled the screen. Lu Sheng shook his head. This wasn't something he could read through quickly. Realizing this, he instructed Yi to select the most authoritative papers and materials for him to review later. Finally, he turned his attention to what concerned him most: the follow-up techniques for the 3 martial arts. It wasn't long for the stellar body technique to display the practice methods for the 3rd stage of the immortal golden body technique, but Lu Sheng hadn't even completed the 2nd stage yet. What he lacked was resources, like the unlimited absorption of beast essence and beast marrow, as he had experienced in the Eastern Military District. But considering the vast scale required to complete the 3rd stage, he'd probably have to drain the entire district to achieve it. So, he put that aside for now. Next up was the follow-up technique of nature's breathing technique, and the content had become even more profound and, well, a bit confusing. It talked about the concept of unity between man and the universe was quite abstract. Currently, this technique brings benefits like rapid recovery, control over his blood energy level, and increased efficiency in martial arts cultivation. However, he couldn't help but feel that this was the most superficial part of the technique, and he hadn't truly tapped into its core power yet. He sighed and thought he would have to take it slow. Lastly, he checked the crystal visualization technique. This time, it wasn't abstract or confusing. Rather, it was quite straightforward. It introduced a psychic technique called will projection. It allowed one to project their willpower using their psychic energy. Just as Lu Sheng finished reading the entire introduction, he found himself dumbfounded. This so-called will projection describes how to use one's own psychic energy to simulate the martial will of others. He delved into the technique. The more he felt that this was either the work of a genius or possibly the creation of a madman. What followed was Lu Sheng fell into a momentary silence, suddenly struck by an idea. What if the dream realm he currently found himself in was in fact created by the technique of will projection? Recalling the battles he had fought in this dream realm, where defeating zombies initially boosted his blood energy, and later allowed him to inherit the Grandmaster's will upon defeating Grandmaster zombies. The more he thought about it, the more his mind became clouded. He felt like he had touched the edge of some truth, but the reality appeared far more intricate than he had imagined, shrouded in a thick fog that he couldn't dispel or fully comprehend. Frustrated and confused, he let out a deep sigh, attempting to gather his thoughts. Eventually, he decided to leave for now. Before departing, he bid farewell to Yi and asked her to organize and save what he had learned today. Yi slowly turned around, fixing its gaze on Lu Sheng's personal information for several seconds. She remained motionless, simply staring at the data before her.